Assalamu alaikum everybody at Jakarta Islamic School. It's me, Mr. Aaron, and I'm here today to help you with your English. Today, I actually want to talk to you guys about something called civilizations. Civilizations. So I want to go through what they are, and actually one of the popular civilizations called the ancient Greeks. So we're going to talk about those today. We're going to talk about some facts and actually what civilizations are, so we can get started on that right now. So let's go, guys. So let's talk about how it all started. So let's look back at thousands and thousands of years ago when people used to live much different to what they do today. This is when civilization started. So before we lived in houses, before we went shopping in like supermarkets and things like that, people used to live in groups and they used to have to hunt for their own food, hunting for animals or farming and things like that. The people that used to do this hunting and like collecting the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts and things like that, they were called hunter-gatherers. So they were hunting and they were gathering all of the food. So this goes so far back, we don't actually have much information on them. We can't find much evidence of them, and like there's not much that we can find out and learn about them. So because they're hard to find out stuff about, they were actually around before history was actually like written down and recorded. So they're actually called prehistoric. They're called prehistoric. But what we do know about them was actually found out by scientists. Those scientists are called archaeologists. So a lot of the things that we found out about them, they liked to keep like cows and sheep and things like that. We call this agriculture. So civilizations, they first started off by keeping agriculture. We still do the same kind of thing today. We still have farms and things like that. We call that agriculture too, agriculture. So today and back then, agriculture helped us with our food supply. So it helped us gather food, it just made it easier so we didn't have to hunt so much. So if we kept the animals ourselves and bred the animals, we wouldn't have to hunt for the animals ourselves. So because hunter-gatherers, they needed to travel quite often, they needed to move around all over the place, what happened was people started to build villages. Like things to keep warm, like you've probably seen pictures of it in history books or on TV or anything to do with history really. They would build like cabins out of mud and sticks and things like that. So they use that to keep them warm and obviously to make sure that they can live. So this is how civilization started. People started to live together in these villages and come together, and that is what created the word civilization. Civilization is when people are coming together and living together. So much like we are now, civilization obviously still exists because we all live together. I wouldn't be teaching you if civilization didn't exist. So again, much like today, back then, in the civilizations, when people started to come together more, people started to specialize in certain things, so they started to get good at certain things. So you would have, for example, the builders. So there will be people that build the village, that repair the village and look after the buildings. You would have farmers, people that do the farming, they gather the vegetables, they grow the vegetables, they take care of the crops. Again, you would have the hunter-gatherers. So the hunter-gatherers would be people out hunting for animals. You would even have people that stay home and look after the children. Normally back then it would probably be the women, not so much the men. The men would actually go out and hunt. So as time went on and civilization started to grow, people started to visit other civilizations. So they started finding other groups of people. And after that, that's when war came and people started to trade with each other. And that's where the currency started to come from. So people started to use things that were valuable for food, for things that they needed, much like we do today with money and our shops, like Indomart, for example. Obviously, Indomart didn't exist back in the prehistoric ages, so people had to visit other civilizations to get these things. So now we're going to move on from talking about the prehistoric ages, and we're going to move on to something that we know about a little bit more. I think you guys understand what civilizations are now. So we're actually going to move on to another civilization that's a bit more recent. Not so recent that we were alive when they were around, but we're going to talk about the ancient Greeks. So the ancient Greek civilization. Ancient Greece was an extremely powerful civilization. They ruled much of the Mediterranean region. So many like Spain, Greece, places like that in the Mediterranean. So the main reason I actually want to talk to you guys about the ancient Greeks is because they've had such an influence, even today, on how we see things and how we do things. They were so powerful that even today we're still doing some things by the standards that they set. So some of the things that they influenced today is things like sport, math, science, the government, so many things that they've influenced that we still use today that the ancient Greeks invented. So ancient Greece was located in what we know now as the Mediterranean Ocean, but back then it was known as the Mediterranean Basin. So that was the ocean that surrounded ancient Greece. And the ancient Greece was on. It was on the ocean, the Mediterranean Ocean. So when we're learning about the ancient Greeks, they're often put into 3 time periods. Those time periods are the Archaic period, the Classical period, and the Hellenistic period. So like I said, the Archaic period is when it's the earliest period in ancient Greece, and it's when ancient Greece started to take its form and started to form together as a civilization. And when this archaic period was over, that is when democracy was created, the government structure democracy. That was at the end of the archaic period, the first period in ancient Greece. So let me just explain what democracy is for you guys that don't know. Democracy is what we have almost everywhere in the world. Most places in the world have this. And it's where the government is led by the people. So the government is controlled by the people that live in that country. And it's done either directly or indirectly. So if it's done indirectly, that means that we are voting for someone to take charge. So voting for the president, for example. So we elect people to run the country for us. And democracy now is used by so many countries. I think it's around 123 countries around the world use democracy as their form, the structure of government right now. So this is just one of the ways that ancient Greece has influenced us today, because we are still using a democracy today in today's society and in our civilizations today. So democracy was created in a city you've probably heard of before. It was called Athens. So the city of Athens, they are the ones that created democracy. There are many other cities in ancient Greece that had different governmental structures, but Athens are the ones that created democracy, and that is what we still use today. So after the Archaic period came the Classical period. So the Classical period is the one that we think of the most when we think of the ancient Greeks, because some of the stuff you probably already know, and it probably came from the Classical period. So let's move on from the Archaic period and let's talk about the Classical period now. During the Classical period, Athens and Sparta, which is another city that you probably have heard of before because it was very famous, that's when they were at their strongest. So during that time in Athens, you may have heard of either Socrates or Plato. So they are from Athens, which are very famous philosophers. In Athens during the classical period, it was the arts and the philosophy that was very important during those times. And in Sparta, art and philosophy wasn't so important. What was more important in Sparta at that time was actually fighting. So war, fighting. They were training people from such a young age, young boys, on how to fight and how to defend themselves and how to basically fight in wars. Now, because Sparta and Athens, they had very different interests. They had different ways of doing things and different traditions and values. So most of the time, they would actually fight against each other because they didn't agree on something that should be something they should be agreeing on, but they weren't agreeing. So they would often fight. Not all the time. Sometimes they would get along together when there were foreign invaders coming to colonize Greece. They would fight together. They would stick together. But when they weren't fighting together, they were fighting against each other. Now, when they were fighting against each other, we also have a name for that. We call that the Peloponnesian Wars. The Peloponnesian Wars is when Athens and Sparta used to fight together against each other. Now, at the end of the classical period is when one of the most famous leaders in the whole entire world actually died. He was killed in battle. So that leader was called Alexander the Great. So you may have heard of this guy before. There's so much history written about this guy. Now, Alexander the Great was from Athens. He grew up in Athens and he was taught by a very famous philosopher called Aristotle. Now, Alexander the Great had such good leadership skills. He expanded ancient Greece all the way from Egypt to India. So he united everyone from Egypt to India, from the east to the west, or from the west to the east. And that's actually not the reason why this guy is so famous and so popular and why we know so much about him. That reason is because in all of his years of leadership, he never lost one battle. He won every battle he ever took part in. So because Alexander the Great loved Greece so much, he spread Greek culture all the way across the world. He spread their culture and how they do things. Now, after his death came the Hellenistic period. So again, I mentioned it before, there were 3 periods, and the Hellenistic period is the last of those periods. So the Hellenistic period went from Alexander the Great's death all the way to 146 BC, when Rome came to Greece and conquered them and turned Greece into a Roman province. So the Romans were another civilization. So like we said before, we were talking about the ancient Greeks. When civilizations came and met, maybe they would trade or maybe they would go to war with each other. So let's backtrack a little and go a little more into detail about the civilizations. So the civilizations of ancient Greece were made up of many different cities. Like I mentioned before, we had Athens and Sparta. There were also many more. Now, they were actually called something called a polis, very, very close to the word police. So polis. So the strongest were Athens and Sparta. But there were many other smaller, less powerful polis. Now, back during the times in ancient Greece, women, slaves, and foreigners, they were not considered free citizens of ancient Greece. Only the men that were born in the polis were free citizens. So only the men were free, and the women, the slaves, and anybody that came to ancient Greece during those three time periods, they were not considered free. And during those times, only the free people, only the people that were considered free, so the men, were allowed to talk about the laws and the rules and how things should be done, so like the government. So only the men were in the government. The women, the foreigners, and the slaves were not allowed to take part in how ancient Greece was being run. Now, the place they would discuss these laws and the way the country should be run was called the Agora. So the Agora was where all of the decisions of ancient Greece were made. And because ancient Greece became a democracy, all of those decisions were made by voting, but the voting could only be done by the men. So unlike today where men and women can vote, back in ancient Greece only the men could vote. So because of democracy, people believe that ancient Greece was the first intelligent civilization because of the previous philosophers. So philosophy, let me explain this just quickly. Philosophy is the art of thinking. And I already mentioned the famous philosophers that you probably have heard of. You've probably heard about them on TV, or you may have read books about them or learnt about them in your other classes. Just to recap, those famous philosophers were Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So again, another way that ancient Greeks have influenced us today, they actually invented the Olympics. So the Olympics originally came from ancient Greece. So guys, the reason that I wanted to talk to you guys about the ancient Greeks is because it shows how important it is to learn about things in the past to then learn and know about things in the present or in the future. The ancient Greeks are still influencing the way that we do things today with our government, mathematics, the Olympics, literature, philosophy, laws. Like, there are so many things that the ancient Greeks invented and came up with that we use today, and that's why I think it's important that you know about it, because it's still influencing us, and it's probably still going to influence the people in the future too. So guys, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. I hope this was interesting. It was very interesting teaching you these things, and thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Thanks guys. Goodbye.